What's going on, everyone? This is the Founder Hour podcast. I'm your co-host, Pat. And on today's episode, we sit down with Opal Tometi. She's a human rights activist, writer, strategist, community organizer, and co-founder of Black Lives Matter. Starting out as a hashtag on social media in 2013, Black Lives Matter has grown to become the largest movement in U.S. history, as reported by the New York Times. We had the unique pleasure of speaking with Opal and learning about her personal background and upbringing, what inspired her to become a human rights activist, how Black Lives Matter ultimately came together, what the organization's goal and purpose is, and much more. We received an overwhelming amount of questions from our audience for Opal, and we definitely tried our best to ask her what most of you were curious to know. So thank you so much for sending us your questions, and we hope you enjoy. Here we go.
I am the daughter of immigrants. I'm a first-generation Nigerian American, born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona. In the 80s, 90s, and on. And I, grew up essentially in the suburbs of Phoenix and got my fair share of, life, the ups and the downs, growing up in that context. My folks are incredible. I had a really beautiful, tight-knit Nigerian American community that was really rooted in our Christian faith. And I was a pretty joyful, passionate, curious kid. I remember, looking at high school and being involved in clubs, quite early that looked at equality and diversity. I was actually the only Black student to be part of a diversity initiative at the district-wide level. I was the only Black person in those rooms, even with administrators and teachers and so on. And so quite early, I realized that there was, something not quite right that was happening in our communities. And I felt the pressures around issues of race and gender, and even immigration status, somewhat early. And I was really attuned to that. My best friends growing up were from Jordan, from Sri Lanka, Puerto Rico, Germany. So I had a really diverse set of friends. And those were the people I truly came of age with. And then I had another set of friends when I'd go home on the weekends that were Nigerian American. And so I always kind of was living in these spaces and interacting with people who were really diverse, in addition to the larger, largely, white and even Latino, Latinx communities in Arizona. And I just had a really unique, I think, experience and upbringing that helped me understand the world being way more diverse and really beautiful. And from that experience, I think I began to examine some of the hardships that my friends were being faced with, some of the questions that we're being faced with. And I too, having so much love and just passion for my people, became more and more concerned over the years. And like I said, got involved in high school. And then, towards my senior year in high school, started working with people who were unhoused. So homeless folks in downtown Phoenix, and working at soup kitchens and organizing my church youth group to go and serve over the weekends. And that was just kind of our bonding activity. And
right.
I was just always doing those types of things from kind of an early age. And my folks also were very much so committed to their community and supporting other families through hard times. So I saw that example and saw different things all around from
That's awesome.
Early age.
And, so Pat and I are both, our parents are of Armenian descent. We're Armenians as well. So we were born here just like you in Los Angeles, but we also were part of these diverse communities, and we kind of saw the world and had a different perspective. So I can't say that I understand where you're coming from, but I kind of understand I understand your perspective, right? And I understand what it was like to kind of grow up with immigrant parents and to speak a different language and to, have a beard at fourth grade, I'm 10 years old, growing hair, right? And of course, those are not massive problems, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just different, right? And when you're a kid, it's it's kind of weird because you're like, everybody's like a little different than each other. But as you grow older, and like I see it more now, you become like much more in tune with your identity, right? People that I know want to like go back and be like, they're doing 23andMe, right? They're like, what's my identity? Where do my people come from? And I think that that's really a generational thing, something that's going to happen more and more. And I love that. But, I'm curious, you touched upon it a little bit, but as a kid or even like in high school, college, growing up, how in tune were you with the environment around you and what it was like to be Black, to be different than everybody else? I mean, I don't know what it's like in Arizona now. It's a little bit different in terms of demographics. But what was that like?
Yeah, you know what? Growing up in Arizona as a young Black girl, I at first I was like, okay, yeah, this is cool. I'm who I am, and I had a rather resilient community, being that I did have my Nigerian community to kind of come back home to and process certain things with, and folks who were just extremely proud. I don't know if you all know Nigerians, but they are a proud people, and we love our culture, we love our food, we love our way of life, and so I always had that kind of in the background, and even like to undergird me. But I was faced with hardship. I remember being, walking down the street to Safeway, to Walgreens, and being called the N-word. I remember friends who had their parents, deported for really insignificant issues. And I remember my father being racially profiled time and time again, to the point that he had to get rid of his car. He was driving a Mercedes at the time that was it wasn't even like a great, beautiful Mercedes, but he'd put it together. He knew some folks and they, fixed up the car. And so he had that car, but he kept getting racially profiled. And so it became so scary for him as a Black man to be, quote unquote, being pulled over for driving while Black. After I think about the 10th time, 11th time, he was just like, I can't drive this car anymore. This is quite literally terrifying every single time. And I think the last time he was pulled over by 8 different police cars, and he was scared for his life. And of course, for what it would mean if something were to happen to him, and he would leave behind 3 children and his wife. So, so growing up, I was very familiar with the fact that I was being looked at as though my skin was a crime or was offensive or, things like that. However, I also had this beautiful community, and even, Black American friends and African American friends and African immigrants and Caribbean and different folks who really showed me that, there's clearly nothing wrong with us, and that we should be proud, we should hold our head up high, and we should persist despite the type of discrimination that we were faced with, not just the name calling, but the real outright discrimination and threats to our very, existence and our families.
Mm-hmm. I think I read somewhere that you studied like history for your undergraduate studies. So tell us like how that was for you, why you decided to do that, and what your sort of takeaway was from college.
Yeah. So I did study history. I have my BA in history from the University of Arizona. I love Tucson, love the Wildcats. And I went into college as, a kind of person who really wanted to have the genuine experience and learn what I wanted to learn. And so when I first arrived at the University of Arizona, I originally planned on studying law. I thought that going to law school was the only real way you can enact change. And so I was always doing pre-law, going to all the events for law school students. In high school, I was also part of mock trial, and I would compete and do these arguments. And by the time I got to campus and began to even examine what was happening at the time around the world, and even the dynamics on our campus, it became very clear to me that I needed to have a better understanding of what had happened before I arrived. And I went in and essentially chose to study history as a practical matter. I wanted to know why we were the way we are as a society. And I graduated early, not to even toot my own horn, but like I graduated in 3 years, and I graduated in 3 years because I was very disturbed by what I was learning. I was essentially learning that we keep repeating history time and time again, and not really learning the lessons that we should be learning. And I was learning about history from Europe to the Americas to the US and beyond. And it just became clear to me that there were certain themes that kept coming back up around race and class and gender that seemed to be persistent. And I just said, okay, enough is enough. I want to get out into the real world, the quote unquote real world, and start doing the work. I wanted to get my hands dirty. I wanted to get real experience. And so as a student at the University of Arizona, I was involved with a few clubs on campus, but I fairly quickly got involved in community-based organizations in Tucson. At the time that I was a student in the early 2000s, there was a humanitarian crisis on the border, and there still continues to be, where people are forced to leave their homes in many ways and are traversing and trying to make a living, and so they're crossing, making these miles and miles, trekking through the desert. People are dying in the desert. People are becoming they're malnourished. They come over with blisters on their feet. People are really suffering. And so that was happening at the border. And at the same time, there were vigilantes who had come to the border at that time with guns. And they were trying to apprehend these really, to me, like these courageous migrants who were trying to do their best in a system that was really not working for them, both in their native countries and then on the route. And it felt really, it felt like there was just this inverted value system that was operational, and that folks that were trying to cross were really the victims of this economy that wasn't working for anybody. And I saw with my own eyes what was happening. I saw that we would even leave bottles of water in the desert for people because we don't want them to die. Like, I think any sane, compassionate human being of conscience, would see that, people are quite literally dying. So let's leave some bottles of water. But what we would find is, ranchers, some would slash the bottles of water or contaminate troughs that were usually used for cows. Border Patrol would slash and empty out bottles of water. And we and myself, I was deeply disturbed by all that I saw, and really felt like my education wasn't doing what I needed it to do outside of, I wanted to change something right now. And what was clear to me was that there have been very serious and egregious events throughout history, and I could see the signs of how that was going to play out once again. And I see the signs playing out right now. And for me, doing the work was essentially, let me go be out in the real world, be able to give my time and devote my energy into change. Yes, academia, like being in school was good and having that education, having that background, but I wanted to get involved. And then the other thing is I was interning all 3 years at the University of Arizona and volunteering at a domestic violence shelter. And so that too was a very formative experience for me, just seeing how so many women and children were being abused in their homes, and just the abysmal kind of resources and support that they could truly get to escape and find safety and find stability. And so to me, that was also extremely important. And so my first job out of college was working at a domestic violence shelter in Arizona, working the night shift and working with women, hosting these women's groups where we would learn more about what's going on, learn more about what they could do to change their circumstances, and just really be a space that they could rest their head on somebody's shoulder and connect with one another, other women who've been through similar challenges, and get a little bit of support in that way. And So that was what the work looked like for me. Early on, I got involved right away.
It might be jumping around a little bit, and feel free to just kind of come back and allude to it. But you're still such a young person who's doing such great things, right? And it's almost like you've lived like decades in these like 3 decades that you've been alive, right? And for those that don't see you, it's like you're agreeing with me with your eyes. But the Black Lives Matter movement, right? What really is so relevant today. So relevant even right now, as we're doing this interview. And if you haven't heard of it, you're probably like not living, right? You're probably not, there's no heartbeat. And then we have other issues. But it started in 2013, right? It's been 7 years now. Talk to us about, what it was. How did it come to be? Why did it come to be? Who was involved, right? Give us a little bit of an overview, and then we'll delve a little deeper into the movement itself and just everything that's come with it.
Yeah, so back in 2013, if folks remember, President Barack Obama was the one who was in office, and there was a lot of activity, a lot of various challenges going on in our world. And in particular, what we saw happening in that time was that Black people who were unarmed and minding their business and living their lives were still being targeted by vigilantes, by police, by security guards, and so on, quite violently, quite routinely. And despite having a Black president, we were still being faced with these types of egregious acts of violence and just disrespect. And in 2013, folks might remember that George Zimmerman, the man who stalked and killed a 17-year-old boy named Trayvon Martin, who was doing nothing but walking in his own neighborhood with a can of Arizona iced tea and a bag of Skittles, was stalked and killed by George Zimmerman. And it broke my heart. It broke my heart when I heard the story, when I saw that his case was unfolding. It wasn't even Trayvon's case, but it felt like it was Trayvon's case, but it was George Zimmerman's case for the murder that we all knew that he did. But it unfolded in the courthouse as though Trayvon was on trial for his own murder. And it was deeply disturbing. It was deeply disturbing on a personal level because I have 2 younger brothers, one of whom was 14 years old at the time. And so it was very clear to me that there was no escaping this story. He was going to hear it. And other people that I love were going to hear it and think that this was something that could potentially happen to them. And it was clear to me that it's a very real threat and concern for a lot of Black people and Black families. And watching this case unfold, finding out that George Zimmerman was being acquitted for the murder. And mind you, I found out he was acquitted for the murder right after I watched a film called Fruitvale Station. And for those of you who may not remember, but it was a story about Oscar Grant, a young man who was killed by Oakland Police Department on New Year's Day. This film, Michael B. Jordan was a lead character, and it was a story that broke me in the theaters. And then quite literally after I watched the film, I walked outside Angelica under the streetlight, standing there with one of my good girlfriends, Kira, who was also another Black community organizer. I looked at my phone, got the tweets, got the text saying that, this is the way that this thing went down. I was broken. I was utterly shattered. And I essentially went home that evening, bawled my eyes out. I don't think I ever cried that hard. I wasn't expecting to be so impacted by this, especially because we do know that this happens so often. But there was something about the age of Trayvon, the age of my youngest brother, just watching Fruitvale Station, so much of it just swirled within me in terms of my feelings. that I knew I had to do something else. I had to do something more. And I was already the executive director for an organization called the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, which is the country's first immigrant rights organization for Black people. So working with African immigrants, Caribbean, Afro-Latinos, as well as African Americans, really understanding that immigrant rights is part of a larger racial justice struggle. And I was already doing that work. I was already working across the country, but I knew something more needed to be done in this moment. And I knew that other people were reeling with this news that George Zimmerman was acquitted. And I went to social media, like so many of us, and saw a Facebook post by one of my co-founding sisters, Alicia Garza, who I'd met just a couple of years before. And in her post, she essentially kind of shared a bit of a love note to Black people. And it said something like, Black people, I love us, our lives matter. And then Patrice, who I actually didn't know at the time, put a hashtag on this Facebook post in the thread. And other people commented and all of that. And I remember seeing it and being so deeply moved by it. And having already been working for a Black organization across the country, there was something about the simplicity of this message, the simplicity of the call to Black people directly, but also the external message, which can be read as a demand to ensure that Black Lives Matter. Both felt so present in that statement that I, the next day woke up and called Alicia and said, hey, I saw this thing online. Like, what's the plan? Like, can we do something? And she was like, yes, I'm already, I started talking with Patrice. We want to do something too. Like, let's do something. I said, I have at that time, I didn't talk about this, but I have my master's in communication studies. I'd done some PR work for immigrant rights organizations and different groups. So it's like, I know how to make a basic website. I can do that. I'll make a basic website. I'll connect it to Tumblr so it's shareable. I'll also start Facebook. I'll start a Twitter, and we'll start to amplify this message, and we'll invite others to use this hashtag as well. And so, chose the colors, yellow and black, yellow being my favorite color, black, because of course we're Black. It's obvious. And it's just like the branding's powerful. And the
By
colors.
the way, our founder, our colors are also black and yellow.
That's right. I did see that. And I was like, look at them. They're onto something as well.
There you go.
I'm curious, in the very beginning, we've obviously seen the growth of the whole Black Lives Matter movement, and from that one hashtag to where it is now. And it's, I mean, you're seeing it on basketball courts, you're seeing it on streets here in Hollywood, you're seeing, on Twitter and all over social media. But I'm curious, when you and Patrice and Alicia got together and started this, what was the original kind of vision for where this would go? What was the goal? What were you working towards? Is there like a specific, do you have a specific goal in mind? Yeah.
The specific goal was to remind people of the civil rights movement and that we can get involved in community organizing. When I built the website, I specifically reached out to a bunch of other community organizers across the country that we knew, from Miami to Syracuse to, Oakland to all across the country. And they said, hey, we're launching this new platform. This is the hashtag we're using. Can I list your organization on this website? Can you contribute a blog piece that, and essentially did a blog carnival. Can you contribute a blog piece that talks about the work that you're doing, that's around racial justice, that really is around ensuring that Black Lives Matter? And can you contribute that to this platform so that we can collectively use our voices, amplify our own voices, coordinate in a way that reminds the public that we don't have to take this. We don't have to sit idly by, and that we have a moral obligation to stand up for justice. And that's essentially what the mandate was from the beginning.
Right.
And in addition to that, I'll say, so that was explicit on the website, adding people's different organizations and inviting people and doing these calls to action. But I also explicitly listed people with, diverse Black identities. Black people are not a monolith. And so it was important to me to ensure that everyone who came to the page who was Black would know that this was for them. So I quite literally listed, disabled folks, trans folks, queer folks, immigrants, undocumented folks, just so people would know that we're talking about the breadth of Black people, because at the end of the day, whether, you're an immigrant or not, you're still being targeted. People, your skin is what folks see. And, you're being impacted by this anti-Black violence as well. And so it was important from the outset just for folks to know that it was about them. And like I said, the broader call was, let's remind people of this tradition of resistance when we are faced with this level of violence and degradation.
Mm-hmm. Right. But I'm curious, it sounds like a lot of the messaging in the beginning was focused on raising awareness and bringing people together around this common cause. And I'm sure it's gotten way bigger than you could have ever imagined, bigger than you or even your co-founders. And it's become a big part of American politics and, reform and legislation. And I'm curious, was that ever the goal, like for it to become what it is today, or did it just naturally become that way?
It was always the goal to have it be pervasive throughout our society and really around the globe. Specifically, so I mentioned, and I did this in passing, that my background is in communication studies. A lot of my research had to do with digital platforms, the use of social media for social movements, and so on. And so I knew the importance of getting online, sharing, digitally, and so on. And it was important for us to use social media because we wanted to be able to get this message into the hands of thousands, if not millions of people. So that was always the case. And the other case is that we knew that the issues weren't just about police brutality. We knew this was about, our education system. This is about our healthcare system. This is about jobs and high unemployment rates of Black people, and about so many other issues, right? And ultimately, we understood that structural racism is the crux of the problem. And if we don't address the root of the problem, we're going to continue to see these types of cases of brutality and just extrajudicial killings that we were seeing on camera and beyond. So it was always the case that we wanted it to be viral. We wanted it to be, pervasive. We wanted this message to reach every aspect of our society, because as we're now seeing, these issues around race and racism specifically are everywhere we go. So if you're talking about healthcare professionals, for example, and the ways in which they treat Black people who come into the hospitals, or how much medication that they're receiving or not receiving, the survival rate of mothers who are giving birth and that being impacted, or how young Black girls are being treated in high school and how they're being overly punished and being channeled into detention and incarceration. Same thing with young Black men. And so for us, it was very important that people get more of an everyday understanding of what is happening when it comes to anti-Black racism in our society. And it was just so critical that even the phrase was broad enough that people can understand that this is about you too. This is about the spaces that you occupy and you occupy. And we wanted people to understand that this is for them as well. They have a responsibility. This isn't just for a few people in one organization or one advocacy campaign. No, it's incumbent upon all of us in this society to stand up for justice, to stand up against anti-Black racism, and to turn the tide on this hate that we're seeing.
Opal, a lot of times, we get this question about the Black Lives Matter movement. It's a question that I've had, and luckily we're here today and we're discussing, and we have a lot more in common than you think. I actually did go to law school, and I did do mock trial in high school and college. I wish I didn't. I wish I didn't. I wish I took your path. Skip those 3 years. But a lot of times in law,
I'm so glad now.
yeah, I'm sure you are.
I've taken many lawyers too at the time. So
we learn about problems, right? We learn about how you identify problems, how you then go on and solve problems, and how you identify things and issues, right? And the one question I have for you is, you mentioned the goal, and it's a very high level goal of we want to bring awareness, but a lot of the times when we amongst our circles and amongst other people and other founders and just generally people, just through conversation on Twitter, on social media, you hear that, and this could be wrong, but that's why you're here to explain it, that we don't necessarily know what the goal is, right? Is the goal to end racism? Is the goal to get some level of legislation? Like, what is the tangible goal? Because the one thing that I've learned, and we learned through entrepreneurship and business, is unless there's a goal, it's very hard to get wherever because there's no destination, right? So we understand the awareness piece, and that's a huge piece, right? I'm not trying to downplay that, but beyond that, what can we do, right? What can the folks that support Black Lives Matter, those perhaps that don't even support Black Lives Matter, what can be done to actually achieve whatever said goal is?
Well, I think this is an important question, and I'd love to make it a distinction because I would say, awareness is a pathway, and a very important pathway. But to me, action is better, right? So awareness is good, but action is better. Like that action is what leads to our transformation. And quite honestly, what we believe and what I believe is that we are on a journey to transforming our society, ensuring that this society is just and treats Black people with the dignity and respect that they and we deserve. And that's ultimately the goal. And I know it might sound lofty or unlike anything else that folks might, be thinking about, like a business goal or one-off campaign goal or so on. But the reality is the issue in the US is so profound and so pervasive that we actually have to transform, our systems, our institutions, and so on. And so there are multiple goals within that.
Right.
There are multiple ways that we need to see things change within that. And so, and I don't say because I'm trying to dodge. There's no dodging.
No.
I think the other thing is that I know that people are asking that question, and at the same time, I do have a problem with the question because to me, you look around and you see Black people being gunned down by police, and it's like, what do you think we're trying to do? We're trying to stop it. There's
Right.
like, that is the objective. That is,
Right.
That's the goal. And of course, we should have goals that are beyond that are more aspirational. And so we do have goals like we want Black people to be able to thrive. It's beyond just surviving. Right. And I'm so grateful that Jacob Blake survived. I thank God that he survived, but he's potentially paralyzed now. His kids are traumatized. The world is traumatized after seeing this. And the world is, up and upset as a result. And so I think, to me, it's like, that is a question for sure, but I don't know that that's the ultimate question, because I think the right response for those who are concerned is just to get involved, just to follow your heart, follow your gut. It's not rocket science. Let's work with people in our community. Let's call our elected officials. Let's get involved and ensure that Black people don't continue to be killed in the streets day in and day out. Folks are tired and sad and depressed and just ultimately fed up that this is going on in 2020 in the middle of a pandemic. It's just the entire thing is just an affront to humanity at this point.
Right. When you really think about it, why should a movement like Black Lives Matter have an opposition? It's a matter of human rights, but the reality is that there is an opposition. And just to sort of understand why, it seems like a lot of it is because it starts getting into things that are very political, like defunding the police, for example. For an issue like that, how can we as a society do a better job of screening for racism as a preventative measure before it becomes too late and someone ends up dying? For example, if there's a police officer and they're actually racist and racially profiling and they have the intention of murdering an innocent person, and it comes down to a split-second decision, how would we be able to truly prevent that from happening again?
I think this is the question, right? The thing that is true is that we didn't get here overnight. And from my studies, you all know I'm a history, like my history background, my research has found, and the research of many others has found, that back in the 80s, actually under Reagan, there was essentially this gutting of the public safety net. Then we have, Bush Senior, we have additional kind of gutting of the public safety net. And mind you, the safety net is really there to ensure that people who have been, disenfranchised for generations have some modicum of support and stability in the case of crisis. It's also for other communities who are falling on hardship to have some support. But we see these attacks on the system. And then we have, Bill Clinton, who sets up these laws and signs into law things like the 3 strikes law, or really increases the presence of police in our communities, and essentially criminalizes being poor. And what we see is that law enforcement begins to come into low-income communities, which in this country, low-income communities are largely communities of color, and they have the license to be there because we see this increased criminalization of quote-unquote petty crimes. And so we see more and more interactions with law enforcement ensue with communities of color because we're now having our neighborhoods hyper-policed. And we see more and more money being pushed to these police budgets to increase their presence in our communities. And then we see this explosion of mass incarceration, and you see more Black people being incarcerated, more brown folks being incarcerated. And so although Black people are only 13% of the population, they make up 40% of the population of those who are incarcerated. And those numbers, I think anybody understands, those numbers don't add up. It doesn't make any sense. We're not committing more crime or doing more drugs than the rest of the population, and so it doesn't quite add up. And what is also true is that these budgets are overfunded, and we're also living in a society that is rooted in racism. The legacy of enslavement, the Reconstruction, Jim Crow, all of these challenges over the years and throughout history and up into present day, the civil rights movement, you know the stories, and you come up into this point. We've always been dealing with some form of racism in different aspects of our society. And so you couple racist values, period, and racist ideologies in our society, period. Black skin is crime. Black folks, are lazy. Black, all of these stereotypes about Black people. You couple those with people having the authorization to carry and use a lethal weapon, like the police using guns, and of course, what you're going to get is the levels of killings of unarmed Black people that we have. It's just what is going to happen. There's no real way around it. You have these values that are operationalized and happening in a matter of seconds. I remember reading a study by UCLA where they conducted a series of studies on implicit bias, which is, unconscious dehumanization. And they essentially found that these biases are happening in less than a second. And so these police officers and people in every sector are making decisions so quickly, but in the case of law enforcement, they have guns. And so they're taught to shoot to kill. That's what the mandate is. And so we see what we're seeing now. It's a natural outcome. And so ultimately what we're saying is, if you continue to see that this thing is not working and wasn't designed to work in favor of keeping Black people safe, it was never designed that way. I don't know if you know this, but police were evolved from what is known as slave patrol. So quite literally tracking down runaway quote unquote slaves. And so these are the origins. So this is the evolution over time. What we have now is lethal weapons, Black people who are being treated as though their skin is a crime, and it's happening like that. And so, yes, we want to see, police being prosecuted. And I think there's a lot of calls for arresting police and things like that. But ultimately, I think the real goal is to ensure that no Black families have to experience this type of pain and loss ever again. That is, when I think about that, that is my ultimate goal. I heard and saw what happened with Trayvon Martin, heard and saw what happened with Oscar Grant, Amadou Diallo, Ayanna Stanley Jones, Tamir Rice, so many people. I saw that, and specifically with Trayvon Martin, I made it essentially like my life's mission. I do not want to see any Black family suffering like this ever again. And sadly, we know it's happened hundreds of times since then. And I ultimately believe that we as a society, and really as any, everyday kind of citizen or consumer, if you know something is ultimately not functioning, you don't use it anymore. You retire it, or you fundamentally change it. And in this case, what we're saying is you don't continue to incentivize or reward a system or an institution that's not working. You think critically about it, and you examine it, and you examine what could work. And what I've been saying in the work that I've done, even 6-7 years back when I first started BLM, was let's redefine safety. What does safety really look like for our communities? Because I think ultimately people are thinking, oh, the police keep us safe. But what we're finding is like, no, the police don't keep us safe. But what keeps us safe is our own communities, our families being intact, our ability to have good employment, having safe and great education for our children, having access to healthcare and good food, and being able to live with dignity. That's what keeps people safe. People are fine and good, and I saw a really great image the other day, a really great poster the other day that essentially said the safest communities are the communities that have the most resources. And I think ultimately that's what we're talking about now. We're saying, let's ensure that all of our communities have the same resources and opportunities that they need to be safe and to live a life of dignity and have the ability to thrive.
Opal, I have a question that my barber is going to kill me if I don't ask, because he's a big fan of the show. And every time I go to him, he's become a great friend at this point. I've been going to him for like 7 years, even though I'm losing hair. So, at this point, I just go to hang out with him. And we talk all the time about different issues. He's in education. He's also, he cuts hair on the side, and he's always discussing, and he's Black, and he's always talking about different issues that come up, political, social, academic, right? And there's no doubt that the work BLM is doing is fantastic. I mean, as Armenians, as people that have always pushed for social justice, right? I've given several speeches in law school at USC, and I've always said, Armenians, we're a small group of people, right? We can't, and we talk about something that happened 105 years ago. We can't do it alone, right? We need Blacks, we need Indians, Mexicans, everybody to join our cause, right? Nobody gives a shit about us. I mean, that's kind of the canvas that I operate on. So I need everybody to unite with me, right? And so every time I go to my barber, to other places, my friends who are not Armenian, I always bring it up, right? But at the end of the day, everybody has questions. They have criticisms. They're like, why do you still care about this? Why is this important? And I was talking to him, and he told me, I would love for you to ask Opal, with all the good work that's happening, a lot of community members that apparently he sees ask, well, okay, there's so many of these questions. Who's funding BLM? Is this a Marxist organization? What's their end goal, right? Like, these are the questions that we're literally reading off of this notes right now. And, he was curious, like, I 100% support it, but I want these questions answered, right? Perhaps you can answer those questions, or perhaps we can start figuring out how we educate others on, what it is that they should be focusing on.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think people should be focusing on the work. They should be focusing on what the task is at hand, and we need all hands to the plow. We need all hands on deck to transform our society and make sure that we are all safe and able to be home with our families. So that to me is like what the focus should be. However, I know that, yeah, people ask about resources and this and that. You know, we're funded by, I haven't even received a paycheck from BLM in my entire 7 years since it's existed. But that's not the point. That's not the question. The reality is there are thousands of donors, thousands of people who believe this message, who believe in what we're doing, and understand that, I say we, but it's like the royal we, y'all included, people of conscience, who are part of a larger multiracial movement for Black lives. And this means that there are quite literally people from across the country, from every sector of work, every religion, who see what we're up to, and they're like, yes, we see that there are Black people who are being killed in the streets, and we're sick and tired of it, and this status quo of Black death is intolerable, and we want to support you all. And so they give. And so they give. And so that's great. And not only do they give, a lot of them are actively engaged and involved in the work themselves. They know that it's not just about sending your money or sending a tweet, that it's about committing to showing up and acting like Black Lives Matter wherever you are. So if you're around the dinner table and your uncle starts talking trash, you speak up. You let them know. If you are at your corporate job and you see that there's discrimination happening in the workplace, or that people keep getting passed over for job promotions and so on, you speak up, you be a real ally. And that means you're engaged in the work. You're anti-racist, not just, I didn't say that. At least I didn't say that. No, it's about taking a clear stance. In this time, it's so critical that people understand that there is no neutral. There's no being neutral in times like this, when you see that people are being killed even in the middle of a pandemic like this. You're either on the side of justice or you're against it. There's no other real way around it. And neutral is actually being complicit with the injustice. And so we've essentially said, we're inviting folks to join. It's a big tent. There are a lot of ways to get involved. There's a lot of work to do. This is a human rights movement. I've spoken before the United Nations on multiple occasions. I've traveled the world talking with partners from Europe, and we went. We got the Sydney Peace Prize. We've done so much around the world, and have got all sorts of critical acclaim from all kinds of leaders and human rights leaders, and folks like Desmond Tutu I met, and just folks who've shown us a lot of love and who remind us, John Lewis included, the late John Lewis, who just said, don't stop. He quite literally said that there is no turning back, and that you are on the right side of history, and you have a moral obligation and a duty to keep on persisting until justice is accomplished in this country.
And the tough part is, and this is something that one of my professors, we were taking a civil litigation class, and he said, when you look at things like the civil rights movement, he's like, the reason why, sometimes people don't understand why we do it is because they don't see the results automatically, right? When you study for an exam, you get a grade, you see the results. But when you're fighting for justice, right, whether we're Armenian, whether you're Black, whether you're Rwandan, whether you're anything in between LGBTQ, there's not an automatic result, right? And that's uncomfortable. That's out of the norm. How does one embrace that discomfort? How does one embrace the unknown and just keep going? Because it's like a battle that never ends, right? It seems like we don't know what victory looks like. So, I don't know, give us your insight on that, because I personally am curious about that.
Yeah. You know what? I actually look to examples like a John Lewis, who quite literally dedicated his entire life to this question and to this pursuit, and didn't waver. And I have other elders and mentors in my life who are, all across the globe, who've shown me that, this is a lifelong commitment. And while it shouldn't be, because I sometimes joke that I would love to have been an interior designer. I love interiors. But here I am. I am unsettled and deeply disturbed by the fact that one of my family members or myself might be attacked and killed one day. I'm deeply disturbed that I might be discriminated out of a job. I'm deeply, disturbed that my children might not, might be treated poorly on a playground or at their schools when I'm not there, or my sister might not get the attention she needs in the hospital. So I'm so concerned about those things that I can't, shake, the call to justice. And I honestly look at these issues knowing that they're bigger than any one of us. And at the same time, as I look out, I see people whose hearts and minds are changing. I see people who are standing up, for justice, and who are, going to rallies, going to protests, making phone calls, getting involved in the movement, giving, people who don't even have much money, who are donating to the movement and donating to different organizations across the country. And so I see that they too are so moved and so impacted. And so I stay encouraged because I see that there's a growing community, there's a ground well of support. And, ultimately I'm like, I know I'm not crazy. Like, I'm not crazy. I have all these, these friends and these mentors who remind me that, no, we're on the right side of history. We're doing the right thing. And yes, the challenges are big, but we do see some gains. We have seen some budgets being slashed. We have seen laws change. We have voted in people who not only look like us, because I don't think it's just that, but I think it's people who have values that mean that we're all treated with dignity, we're all treated with respect. And so we have seen those types of gains over the years. And I think we're also seeing those gains in the cultural space. We're seeing art that looks more like us. We're seeing Hollywood even take up these questions and look at the types of images that they're putting out there, the types of roles that people are being asked to play, the types of narratives that are being shared. And so these things are changing and shifting. And also folks are understanding that this is about real investment in Black communities. They're understanding that over the years, over generations, Black communities have been left out of the formal economy in many ways. They've been forced and tracked in a way where they can be devalued and can be sent off to prison and essentially warehoused there. And so folks know that now that this is the time that we have to invest in Black communities, invest in Black businesses, invest in, Black organizations and institutions so that we can rectify and course correct for the years of negligence and willful abuse. And so I think that to me is really important. So I like to look at sometimes small wins and medium-sized wins, and that to me gives me hope. And then, lastly, I'll just say that the other thing that gives me hope are the young people in my life. I have some incredible friends with gorgeous children, and they send me the cutest videos, and those things keep me hopeful. One of my good girlfriends from college, she's Chinese, her daughters are Chinese. She sends me these videos where they're talking about race and racism, and they're like, we want to support Opal. Or my other good girlfriend in Hawaii, and she's sending me a video of her son who's 3 years old, and he's chanting Black Lives Matter, and he's learning from a young age that, no, I'm not just going to be neutral or not think that I need to talk about race and I'm behave like I'm colorblind, but no, I'm going to acknowledge race, and actually I'm going to stand up and use my voice to support Black lives. And so, we see that the young people are getting this message, and it's not even a divisive message. It's a very powerful, loving, beautiful message that is rooted in human rights and dignity, and everybody should be on board. And I am really heartened when I see just the diversity of folks who have joined, and it's beautiful. And then I guess the real last thing I'll say that I think that is important for folks to know, and I don't know if you all know this, but New York Times declared and named Black Lives Matter as the largest human rights movement in human history, which is amazing. It's amazing. It's humbling. It's really a testament to people of courage and conscience standing up, and for them heeding the call. It's not I couldn't have magically done anything. There's no special hashtag that actually elicits that kind of response. That's people in their own hearts seeing what's right and what's wrong, and knowing that they want to be on the right side of history. And so that's important. It's powerful. But the other thing is that we are also the entity that has the most disinformation against us in human history as well. So while we have the distinction of being the largest movement in history, we also have the distinction of having the entity that has the most disinformation campaigns against us in history too. Compared to any other company or other kind of entity, we have that as well. And so, I understand why there are so many questions, but it's largely because we have such an attack on us. And that I think also says something, right? You're not doing anything of significance if you don't have those kinds of attacks. That's what they say.
And on that note, and I know you got to run, and we'll just kind of sort of close with this. On that note, how do you sort of address these things? Currently, is there like a voice, one person, or is it you and your co-founders? Like, is there someone that addresses all these sort of attacks and these different kind of angles that people are coming in and accusing you of this or that? Like, because I do agree with you. I think that this thing should not be divisive. This thing, we should be unifying over Black Lives Matter, and we should be unifying over just human rights. It's not something that should have it's not just like, it shouldn't have like them an opposition like it does have today. So I'm curious, like, how do you sort of address these things and make sure that we're all on the same page when these things come up?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no silver bullet that we found to addressing the level of disinformation that there is. And the reality is that we are, an entity and a series of organizations that are part of a larger movement and coalitions around the country. But we aren't as well funded and well fueled as some of these bots and these factories, essentially, that are quite literally writing fake stories and distributing and disseminating fake news about us online and in real, traditional press every single day. We just don't have the resources to deal with that. And so we are in many ways facing an uphill battle. Although we have the most support, we're still kind of facing this uphill battle of filtering through all of this disinformation that's out there. And I feel for people who genuinely have questions, but I honestly also just encourage folks, you can go to blacklivesmatter.com. It doesn't have every little thing that's going on there, or every like response to every fake piece of information or news, but it has a lot. And I encourage people just to go there for the basics. We have pretty much statements on most things of significance are on there. And we've been interviewed by the AP News or New York Times and different outlets. And so most questions of real significance and substance have been answered already. And so I just encourage folks to go to the source, go to the source. Don't go to third party sources for your news. It's just not reliable. And, quite honestly, when you see what's happening in the world, I think the answer should be clear as day at this point.
Well, Opal, thank you so much. I know we have gone beyond what we were scheduled to do, but we really appreciate you taking the time and really, your passion, obviously, about this movement and about this just reality that we're all living in is extremely apparent. And hopefully those that are listening, they don't only listen, but they go and do their own research. They go and educate themselves, because at the end of the day, that's really what matters. All these things that happen, everything people believe in has to come from within, right? And it's good. I think it's okay to ask questions. I think it's okay to question authority. I think it's okay to be uncomfortable. I think you just have to go and find the answers for yourself. And, eventually I think people will get it. And I think that, Martin Luther King said it best, right? The time is always right to do what's right. And I think that eventually people will understand that they're going to be on the right side of history. As we see, like the younger generation, I look like I'm 45, I'm 28, but, our generation of people, our generation of kids and young adults, they're going to see this. They're going to be a part of it, right? We're exposed to what this is. It's hard. I always talk to my parents and others' parents. It's hard to change the minds of people that are 50, 60, 70 years old. I'm not saying it's impossible. They understand it. But for us, I think, for me and Pat, I think my focus is make sure that those that come after me, my kids, my follow generations, that they already, it's not an issue, right? Like the sky is blue, it is fact. So I think for me, that's my goal. And somebody that understands why social justice matters, I think that we must unite. I think people must help each other with their movements. It shouldn't be just blacks fighting for black lives. It shouldn't be Armenians fighting for Armenians and gays and lesbians fighting for gays and lesbians. It's just not going to work until everybody's on the same page. Until we're all together, it's not going to work out. So, again, thank you for your inspiration, for your time, for your dedication, for your energy. I mean, just everything, right? And hopefully this isn't the last time we speak, and hopefully we can, continue to communicate and, collaborate and, and build on this relationship. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciated this conversation. This was quite good. I really enjoyed hearing a little bit of your story and, your background as being Armenian, and I have some good Armenian friends growing up as well. And so it's incredible to think about things through, multitude of lenses, and understanding that there's a lot more for us to do. And this is ultimately about human rights and dignity for us. So thanks for having me, and absolutely hope to be talking with you all again, soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Opal.